have a loose structure for tonight. I'm hoping that the most interesting aspect won't so much be the agenda, but whatever we bring forth in conversation with each other. But yeah, chaos, crisis, and creativity. I think this came out of Marco's brain, the title. And for me, I kept thinking of, oh, hey, Zach. I kept thinking of Terrence McKenna's Trialogue talk with Ralph Abraham and Rupert Sheldrake, and how they all kind of got together and just riffed off of each other's ideas. So I kind of came into this with the same spirit. But yeah, the energy I'm sensing from the past 5 or 6 weeks publishing on Metapsychosis has been this kind of generative question, which is, how do we hold the kind of enormous potential that's emerging in the world today at the same time as acknowledging the intensity of the crisis that we're also encountering? It seems to be transformative as well as, or in addition to being extremely... Hearing a lot of feedback. If everybody can mute themselves while we're not talking, that'd be helpful.
Marco, you want to mute everybody?
Yeah, I'm going to try.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Thanks. So there's a kind of intensity, I think, between these two possibilities, sort of transformation and catastrophe. And that's in the title, Chaos, Crisis, and Creativity. Because, we can see it simply as a chaotic moment, as a crisis moment, as a moment we don't know what to do, or we can kind of respond to it creatively. And I've been thinking a lot about this in relation to like Henri Bergson's thought, which sort of views evolution as this kind of creative, proactive response to the circumstances of the world, to kind of reaching back into the world with a telos or an intentionality. So kind of holding those two, for me anyway, and that's sort of what I gathered from the subject here. But I don't want to kind of go into my own rant, so I kind of want to just introduce the editors first. And I see where most of us are here. There's Marco, there's Harmon, there's Natalie, there's Ollie. Don't see Jen on, but that's okay. So we put together this crazy little creative project, Metapsychosis, which is part of the larger project Theory of Everybody, in an attempt to create a space to kind of explore these ideas together and hopefully create something interesting, if not at least entertaining for the time being, on these subjects. So here we are, and I guess I'm just going to go around so everybody can do an introduction. Marco, I wanted to ask you first. So what does this chaos, creativity, and crisis mean to you as an editor at Metapsychosis?
I don't want to go on a rant either. That's I think the danger.
Elevator pitch.
Well, I'm looking here at the chat, and Benita says, when does creativity not feel like chaos and crisis? And I think that kind of hits the nail on the head. It feels that way. And whether it really is that, what the reality of these terms really is, I think is an interesting question. I throw out words and name things, different creative combinations linguistically, but the actual kind of reality of what we're pointing to is often not, is often difficult to discern. And sometimes it's not difficult to discern. Sometimes it just like smacks you in the face. And that tends to be like when I feel creative, but it's an ebb and flow. And I don't know. I mean, this, obviously like we're in a moment with an election going on, with terrorist attacks, with mass killings, all these kinds of things that are in the news. And I know that we can step back objectively and look at the data and look at, the number of killings or the relative like per. But there's also a subjective aspect, which is the feeling of what's going on. And a lot of that is fueled by our social media experience and just the exposure, that we have to events and to each other. And I relate to that in a lot of different ways. I relate to that with horror and with sadness and with anger, and I relate to it with indifference a lot of times, and numbness a lot of times. It just kind of is there, and this kind of mute force that I just can't deal with. But where I feel that I'm, what I'm most interested in, like when I'm not terrified of it, is relating to it as an artist, relating to it creatively, and seeing, okay, not just like how does that turn into a poem or a book or what have you, but how does it actually how does it effectuate a reality? If I exist as an artist in that way, with like in that space of exposure to what is really happening. So that's what this is about for me, or one little riff on what it's about for me. But again, like we've been publishing stuff like for 6 weeks. I've put my voice out there, and I kind of want to just shut up and like hear what comes up around what we've around what we've done so far, which is very incipient. And I have a lot of ideas. We are in this kind of thick of creative discussion on what we want to do, what we want to bring forth. But that all really depends on what our communities bring forth, like what gets brought into the space and how it mixes together and what unfolds from that. So that's what this is about, from my point of view at this moment, in the midst of my mix of terror and enjoyment, just seeing all your faces here.
To be fair, I think that's probably, in my opinion, the only proper response to what's going on. Just a combination of elation and horror, and feeling like everything is wrong, and then also having moments where there's a tremendous feeling of elation that there are good things happening. But let me ask Natalie, do you have an opinion about chaos, crisis, and creativity?
Well, Jeremy, this microphone is just so goofy. Well, in Egyptian mythology, chaos and creativity are basically the same thing. We find this in most of the primordial myths. The primordial waters were essentially known as chaos, and from those were where all creativity sprung, all form and matter sprung, really. So anything that is even worth being created is brought forth from some kind of chaos. But at the same time, I suppose you could say that when things are being formed in the womb, there's a chaos, but there's also a kind of order to the chaos. So, eventually a baby is formed, not just like a mass of cells. So there is probably some sort of order we're missing that we can't see because we're tiny human beings with tiny brains. C.S. Lewis said that it seems like there's no plan because it's all plan. It seems like there's no center because it's all center. So it might just be that we just aren't seeing it the right way. In the Baha'i faith, these kinds of energies are known as energies of integration and disintegration, and they both play a role in birthing something new into the world. So things that are old have to disintegrate, and obviously whenever something is disintegrating around you, it's pretty terrifying, but the idea is that it has to happen in order for forces of integration to take place and build something new out of it. So we see that throughout all of creation. So I suppose as a mortal being, I'm afraid for my family and for you and for people that are, transient beings. But in terms of our planet and the human species, I suppose I'm an optimist, and I think that we'll get through this period of birth pangs and see something new that we can't even imagine yet. But I think we can find glimpses of it, as Gebser would say, in our art and our media and our culture. And I think that's ultimately what metapsychosis is about, is trying to catch these glimpses of what's coming to birth now through the artists and through the writers, and giving those people an opportunity to publish things that they wouldn't ordinarily have an opportunity to write in other publications. So, yeah.
Well said. Yeah, Gebser has this terminology where he describes a transitional age between different structures or between different transformations of culture as Janus-faced. One is looking towards sort of disintegration, and the other towards mutation. So I think that's important to hold both in mind. But let me move to Ollie. Ollie, I would love to hear your thoughts on the theme of tonight as we're going around with the editors, and we're going to open it up to everybody.
Well, let me riff right off what you just said there about the Janus face character, generation and mutation. In the novel Geek Love that we're reading right now, there's the scene early on, I think we've just encountered it, we're about to, when we go through the aborted versions of the early experimentations. We see some fetuses that are being held in like formaldehyde in jars. And one of the most prized amongst those is a child named Janus. And so I think this whole idea of finding patterns within the art that were the different posts that we've had and the different artwork that we're looking at is kind of our response to the crises that we're encountering. We're looking for ways that there's a commonality amongst the visionaries at the cusp of the culture are bringing forth and trying to find ways to be able to disseminate, to communicate those things to the rest of the culture. So that's what I would say. That's my response. Not that I'm constantly trying to do things like that. I'm noticing the more time I spend in this community that the patterns of recognition that come up all the time are what keep me hooked and interested and give me a field, a response to what's going on in people's crisis. I mean, I'm in Canada, I'm not in the US, so it's not immediate for me politically, all the chaos that's going on, but we kind of up here have a little bit of a capacity to be able to take a long view on things. So perhaps that's a part of it as well, but that's kind of my response is I look for the patterns and I find ways to like make sense of how this is related to that and to be able to talk about those things with people and make connections. So there's something about that liberates me from my own fear, or maybe is employing that fear in a way that's fruitful or generative.
Awesome, Ollie. Thank you. Carmen, what are your thoughts on this inquiry, chaos, creativity, crisis?
I was just writing it to Zach, actually, in response to his question. What strikes me first and foremost is that I feel like we're so privileged to even be talking about it this way. That we're privileged to choose to proactively think creatively, and that so much of what chaos is for many other parts of the world where, they're forced to, or find it in themselves to respond creatively. And to a certain degree, I feel like we have a comedic distance still from what's going on, and that's a privilege right now. And I think that's why I feel it's really important what's happening here, what we're trying to do, which is go into it rather than watch it from a distance and find ways of understanding it, transmitting it to others, as Marco says, like using art to face the terror. That's what I think.
I think that's a great point, that art is a way to really go into it, to really submerge yourself and your consciousness and your just your beingness with the beingness of the world, and to feel into that and translate it into something, a poem, a piece of work, a novel. So So excellent. We've gone through the editors who are sort of like the staff editors, but I want to open it up now to everybody. This is just an inquiry that we can all kind of explore right now. Anybody who feels they want to chime in with a thought or a feeling. I know, Zach, you had some good questions in there. Maybe you want to chime in. JF, I know you talk about art, so I'd love to hear from you as well. So whoever wants to go first.
Zach can go first.
Been volunteered. I don't know what to say. I think I'm drawn to this community aesthetically, and it's exciting and fun, and a lot of smart, passionate people here, who are interested in outside the box ideas and sort of diving into them pretty thoroughly. The thing I think about the most are the two questions that I put down. How do we create a better world, and how would we even know if we were succeeding or not? And how do we most effectively move in that direction? So, very basic question, maybe the most basic question. And I'll add a little personal thing. I just a few moments ago, reading a Wait But Why long post about Elon Musk, realized that one of the reasons I often feel like I'm conflicted against my own best wishes to move in this direction is because I don't want things to change. I'm terrified of change. And so hopefully that doesn't become, I can get over that, and we can all get over that and sort of like embrace change and change for the better. Because I think that just like going like this probably isn't a very effective means of making things better.
Good thoughts, JF?
Yeah, that was great. Everybody's been saying very intelligent things, and I don't really know what to add. I liked. I'm a little bit afraid of change too. I find that just today we had I'm up in Canada, not too far from Oliver, and it was really warm today. And I was reading that we've been breaking records now for 3 years globally for temperature. And I have two little daughters, who are 5 and 3. And that's when I find the crisis, I do find myself directly, facing it pretty directly when I think of them, and I think of the future, and I think of the possibilities. At the same time, I'm able to forget very easily, the crisis and dive back into the fray of my own life, and there my work has been trying to really to work hard to establish what Martin Buber calls an I-thou relationship with people, but also with objects and with my environment, and just to really approach my world as a living thing, and to approach each moment as a kind of sacred opportunity, to put it in a highfalutin way. But to me, that's what art does. Art for me works at the individual level. It can work with many, many individuals, but it'll work with each one. And I find that in our world of rapid acceleration of every system of this kind of overwhelming technological takeover of our lives and everything, we tend to move out of what Martin Buber called the I-thou world into the I-it world of objects and things and kind of discrete entities kind of interacting from a distance. And the reason why one of the reasons why I chose to write about art was because I see it as a call to come back to a kind of more direct, embodied relationship with each other and with our surroundings. So to me, that's always seemed to me like the answer, to a lot of problems. But of course, it's not really an answer, because you'd have to expect all these different people to do this at the same time, and that's probably not going to happen. But what's been important for me, and I think it is important, is to be able to forget the crisis at large, to focus on the crisis in our own lives, and to really kind of tend our gardens, and to this capacity to forget without forgiving, or to forget without becoming dumb to it, but to be able to appreciate that the world remains what it is, and the beauty remains around us, and to really kind of like not feel guilty about our privilege to be able to engage with that beauty and to perceive it, but to really cherish it and to try to increase it and to try to expand it into the lives of those who surround us. And I don't know what I'm talking about, but that's basically kind of what my knee-jerk reaction is at this point.
That's great. Thanks, JF. What you brought to mind was, and I guess we can kind of open this up to anybody who wants to chime in, feel free to do that now. Just unmute yourself. But in a moment, I think I'm going to definitely share something. One of the things we want to do, and maybe while we're all speaking, you can get this ready on your end, but one of the prompts that we have is to just share a piece from Metapsychosis that we feel speaks to this question, this inquiry. And I have a few already in mind just from what we're talking about. Of course, your piece, JF, and of course, Connor Habib's piece, which I had an interview with him. But he kind of speaks to this inquiry about art and about the individual in the sense that, there's this debate, and he mentions a debate between him and Daniel Pinchbeck talking about the role of art in an age of crisis or transformation, and how there's another book by Susie Gablick called Conversations Before the End of History or Before the End of Time. And this, both books kind of, they're exploring this question of the role of art and whether art needs to serve, ecological awareness and bringing awareness of climate change, and these role-oriented, more pragmatic-oriented thought trails, or can art still be this kind of individual sort of wrestling with themselves in a personal way, tending to their own garden? Can it be both? Can it be more? So I'm going to share that quote later, but if anyone has a thought about this question of chaos, crisis, and creativity, and clearly art, feel free to chime in.
Can I chime in?
Please do.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, hear you clear.
Okay, great. Hello, everybody. I'm just sort of getting used to this technology here. This is the first event I've had this experience online. What interests me is, I'll tell you a little story. I was going through some very difficult crisis. This is about 5 years ago. Everything's pretty good right now. But about 5 years ago, I was having these visions and lucid dreams and extraterrestrials, and it was really very scary. So I went to this Buddhist teacher, Reginald Ray, with Dharma Ocean, and I had a conversation with him about this. And, I asked him about the demonic. And he said, well, he listened very mindfully, and he was very sensitive to where I was coming from. And he said that there's really nothing anyone can do to help you. You're sort of on your own. And that actually gave me a great deal of confidence. And he said that he thought the demonic was fairly rare, but I actually don't think it is that rare. I just think it's rarely talked about. Because I think right now, we've been talking a lot about crisis. I do believe, and we've been talking about the visionary. I think you mentioned, Ollie, about the visionary cusp of culture. Because I think it's in the Bible, in Isaiah, where they say that the people perish without a vision. And I do think that we're seeing in the election with Hillary and with Trump that that neither one of them have a real vision. They have a mission for themselves and the group that they represent, but that's not the same thing as a vision. So I know when I'm writing, I find myself going into these trance states, these visionary episodes, and trying to sort it out and sort of using fiction as a way of doing that rather than theory. Because I read tons of theory, but I'm not very good at theory. But theory does support me in a way. But I think fiction is the way for me to sort of, it's like an exorcism for me. And in the story that you published for me, In the Crack, all of those were actual experiences that I had. Synchronistic events and entities that come to me at night. Some of it's ecstatic and some of it's frightening. But I felt that, it's easy to pathologize these kind of experiences. And I think that's why most people keep them quiet, because we really don't have our current paradigm just doesn't have a way of holding these experiences for people in a way that they could release them and integrate them. And what I loved about the ever-present origin, when we worked on that, moving from exploring the magical and the mythical and the rational, especially the division rational, and how I think Epler said the integral would be the higher octave of the magical, the mythical, and the rational. And so that's sort of always in the back of my mind when I write. I'm sort of interested in creating characters who are dealing with that kind of dilemma. So I'm just sharing that with you. Thank you very much, everybody, for your kind attention here. Because I'm sort of going into, what I'm really interested in writing about is, and what I'm interested in reading about, is not what people know. I mean, I personally don't know very much, but I'm obsessed by a great deal. And so someone told me once, don't write about what you know, write about what you're obsessed by. So that's what I'm offering here, is my obsession.
Yeah, I love that.
Which is sex and God, basically. That's what I
Hey, Jared, can I throw out a question?
Go ahead.
I want to kind of hone in on what we're really talking about. Like, what do we really mean by crisis? Is there a crisis? Are there many crises? Is the crisis a distinct event in world historical time? Is it something that is more, ever present, as it were? I mean, does it belong to the order of being? Is to exist to be in crisis? Like, what we could, we put this out there and it's coming through one particular, perspective, voice, framing, etc. But I'm realizing, like, what the fuck are we actually talking about? Like, what does that mean? And I'm curious to hear, how people really even understand that idea.
I'm feeling bonita for this question.
I'm
really feeling bonita.
The crisis of not hearing bonita.
Oh, we don't hear you, bonita. We're having a crisis.
I unmuted myself.
Oh, we hear you now.
Okay, wait. Is that better?
Totally better.
Okay, I put it up because I have a cough, so it sounds horrible when I cough. You just have to. It sounds like this big jumbo jet trying to take off, and it's got too much weight or something. Okay, so yeah, that was a prompt for me because, yeah, what is this crisis? So I thought it was funny because that's exactly what I was thinking, and Marco was going to renege on his own concept of crisis. So here's a statement that I wrote during this little session we're having. There is no threat today that we haven't already faced as a species. I think this is absolutely true. We've had huge tectonic plates and crisis and climate and what is the crisis? Like, what is the crisis here? Like, is it a unique crisis? Is it a kind of a iterative crisis? So I think what we are not able to do that's unique is to sustain the past. And I think, Zach, when you said I'm afraid of change, that this whole thing started coming up for me. I think that might be unique in this crisis. I think there's a discontinuity. If you talk about Gebser, he says that at all these true evolutionary events, there's something very discontinuous. And I think what we might be experiencing is exactly that, that we can't hold on to the past. It's just slipping, it's going, gone. It's like, be careful what you wish for, because for 4 or 5 generations we've wanted change, and now it's like it's going away. So we look at, for example, the transition from oil-based economy is going really fast. I mean, it's only been 100 years in, and it's going to be like another 40 years out. That's it. This is really fast change. So I think the speed of change is encouraging, but it comes with this sense of complete crisis. So those were my thoughts. Thanks.
Anybody want to riff on that?
Yeah. Hi, Bonnie.
Hi.
I appreciate what you said. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said something about the human species. There's nothing we're going through now that the human species hasn't gone through before. And also, each individual, the species has, many members of our species have been born, grow old, and die. But each individual, I mean, I haven't done that before, personally. I can use my imagination, and I can borrow from the imaginations of others, but I think it's very troubling to me to mistake what's happening, with the species and with what's happening to each of us individually. I mean, sure, many of our experiences, we can look at the history of the magical and the mythical, and we can see correspondences or overlaps or resonances. And yet, when we're having these weird experiences that we have a hard time putting into words because there isn't sort of a consensus about it, I think that's a unique challenge. I'm just offering that to you. I don't know if I misread you or misunderstood you, or if that adds anything to what you just said. Thank you.
Benita, if you want to reply to that response, it's fine. If not,
No, I think it's just two different orientations. I think that our unique challenges are, I like what you said about giving that the fact that your instruction was, no one can help you, and that gave you confidence. I thought that was really cool, and I think they're just two different orientations. But I think that for me, I've been there, and in one sense, all those journeys and all those paths are very unique, and no one can help you. But on the other hand, I think that they ride on a larger kind of movement that is a species movement, that is a movement of life, that is a movement of the planet, that is a cosmological movement. So I hope that gives you confidence too. I guess that's what I would like to say.
John's point in regards to that this is new for the individual, at least, I think also speaks to this. I don't know what we would call it, a kind of a polarity between the individual and the collective. Because in one sense, there's always been a crisis, and there's always been a transition between, if we're going to take a Gebserian approach, these tremendous epochs, these transitions of consciousness where things break down and then reassemble and reintegrate. So we've collectively dealt with this before, but perhaps we haven't individually dealt with it before in this way. And maybe there is a novelty to that. Maybe the changing factor, Bonita, what you're saying is novelty. It is this idea that we can't hold on to the past because of novelty, because the scale in which this thing, which has always happened, which has reiterated itself throughout biological and cultural history, is now happening at a planetary level, at a global level. It's not just tectonic plates moving and meteors crashing. It's the meteors and tectonic plates that are being iterated in a form of social and technological and cultural behavior and just civilization. So in some ways, I can kind of see a kind of archetypal, if you would call it that, or just a kind of just a pattern that iterates itself, and perhaps it just iterates itself up and through the complexity of history and through the emergence of complex civilizations and, Teilhard de Chardin's new sphere. These are all perhaps things that have always happened, and now they're happening through the human realm of experience at a collective level. But gosh, who else? Who wants to chime in here? Who's got something gnawing at them?
If I may.
Yeah, sure, Chris.
Audible? Okay. Regarding what Marco said first about crisis, and what Bonita said subsequently about crisis being differently viewed, the possibility is it's a certainty that crisis represents opportunity differently viewed. What was a crisis for the dinosaurs was an opportunity for the mammals. And mammalian life, as it exists today, may benefit from our extinction. So the point of view is pretty significant as to what constitutes crisis. But further, the human race may be more properly called the human stumble, because we've bounded from near dead end to about 3,000 breeding pairs 60,000, 80,000 years ago, according to geneticists. So it's always been thus. It just seems to be happening at a quicker pace than was formerly the case. If you consider that the difference between evolution and revolution is pace, we are operating at a sort of non-Darwinian revolutionary pace of bounding from crisis to crisis at this juncture in human history. And the vast majority of creatures that nature has spawned throughout the history of life on Earth, down to the fourth decimal point to the right, fourth 9 to the right of the decimal point, 99.9999% of all species who have ever been doing things here don't do them anymore. So our odds have always been long. However, we have this unique ability to recognize this condition. And if we can recognize this condition, we can attend to this condition. And one of the ways to attend to it is through creativity, which is fundamentally an act of chaos, leading from chaos to order. The Chinese, the ways that the world can be divided in two, one is those who look toward a future perfection, and as is the case in the West, heaven, and those who look to the past, the apocryphal first emperor of China. And what made that an era of perfection was that it was said with absolutely no authority and no supporting evidence that that emperor imposed an order that was harmonious with nature. So that brings up the question: what are the ways of nature? And the ways of nature, first and foremost, are chaos, perpetual revolution, perpetually. That's how nature operates. So that idea, when Trotsky proposed it to Lenin, he thought that was a good idea. When he proposed it to Stalin, after Stalin was well entrenched, he got the ice pick. So it's not popular so long as we value power over ranking, so long as we value ranking over linking, so long as we value love, power over love. But the creative aspect, the saving grace, and the final little bit on this rant is that the only qualitative, not quantitative, but qualitative differences that I can see distinguishing our species from any other species is our ability to apprehend beauty for its own sake, not to just perceive it, but to capture it for its own sake and tell it to another, and the ability to organize melody and harmony, which many other species perform rhythmically, so that that can be communicated and done again over time. So it's creativity that will save us. It's not might. It's not standing against nature. It's biomimicry enacted first as what do you get when you roll a hand grenade into a French kitchen? Linoleum blown apart. So creativity, the creative impulse here is the hand grenade, and that's not to say that it can't be done lovingly, or that the shrapnel has to be anything harder than a tender embrace or a sweet kiss, but the explosion has to happen, and it may as well come from people who've already sort of cued themselves to operate to allow their personal operating verb to be the magnanimous to get rather than the reptilian. The reptilian to get, which is dominated since those days and before. Every species is as exploitative as their environment, as their abilities allow, a maxim from biology. But by an act of will to voluntarily transform our individual operating verb from to get to give, there your creative impulse, as dangerous to the status quo as it might be, can't lead you astray.
Well, Chris, that was very insightful. Thank you.
Generally met with deafening silence.
Well, you definitely...
I want to applaud and bow down. Just
It's still landing.
that all in, yeah.
We're still coming down from that.
Because we were muted.
Oh.
I wanted to follow up the linoleum blown apart with Jesus H. Crisis.
Can I chime in quickly?
Please.
Yeah. It just occurred to me that maybe we're perceiving a lot of the things going on in the world right now, like climate change and the crisis in the U.S. and all that, as a kind of like manifestation of chaos. But it seems like this manifestation of chaos, or the threat of chaos, is coming from an overabundance of order. And it seems to me that a lot of these crises are coming about as a result of certain systems that were put in place, technological systems, industrial systems, that are just functioning maybe a little too well, and that there's maybe a little bit too much control from the human department over the rest of the planet. It seems to me like the fact that we're the authors of this crisis, and that this crisis comes about as the result of what millions of people do when they wake up in the morning. Well, not to blame anybody, but people have to, build these systems and make them run and perpetuate them despite the fact that they're destroying everything. Maybe chaos is more of our friend than our enemy here, and as we've been kind of hinting at, and maybe what we're seeing is kind of an antiodromia, right? A kind of reversal, or certain forces reaching their limit or their extreme and starting to invert themselves, or kind of turn into their opposites. And so maybe we should qualify what we mean by crisis. It seems to me like everything's going according to plan. If you ask if you look to a certain agenda right now, it looks like capitalism is doing extremely well, and law and order, as violent as they can be, are very much in place and not really threatened at all. Trump is the result of an algorithm, right? It was always going there. He's the result of propaganda techniques and that were designed very deliberately during the First World War, and he's the end result of this way of thinking. Everything is going according to plan, as far as I can see. And maybe what we need is precisely the grenade in the French kitchen, although maybe the American kitchen. So I don't know. I don't know if that's constructive, but it just occurred to me that a lot of these terms start to require some nuance as we move in. I don't really know where the chaos comes in so far, except for the fact that there's a lot of violence going around, but violence has always been a part of good old law and order, right? I don't know.
Can I respond to that? Well, if the violence is happening to you, it's very chaotic. If someone has a brick in their hand and they're aiming it at your head, it's chaos. If you watch it on TV or you read about it in the newspaper, it's just something that's happening to somebody else that isn't you. I think a lot of people are in chaos, not every day, or every week or every month, but I think there are a lot of people who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Many of us are probably more stable than other people are, or we have some advantages. Living in America, I think many of us certainly do. So I think there are stable systems and there are simple systems, and you can use best practices and certain kind of routines that have worked before, and that's a good thing. And you don't need visionaries in those kinds of systems. But I think when you're in a complex system, especially one that's unstable, then I think those best practices don't work. You have to be innovative and come up with something different that works. And I think that's where you have to get experimental and take risks, but not risks that are stupid. You want to take, safe to fail kind of experiments, I would call them. So I think we're in that zone of uncertainty. I think many of us are uncertain about what kind of system we're in, whether it's stable or unstable or pathological. You can be in a complex, unstable system that is very creative. I think that my feeling sometimes is everything's fine, but sometimes I do sense that we might be in a complex, unstable system that we imagine is simpler than it is. And it's when we make the mistake of thinking it's simpler than it actually is that we move towards chaos, which I think is fairly rare. I think chaos is when no rules apply, and you have to act fast, and you have to do something. And I don't think we're quite there yet, but it seems to me there's a meltdown, the Republicans and the Democrats, and I think we're really having a breakdown in communication about how we're going to govern this country. And since we're such a big country, it has huge effects. So I just wanted to offer that. And maybe clarify a little bit about what chaos could possibly mean, because many of us are not in chaos every day, otherwise our lives would be totally unlivable.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. Maybe I wasn't very clear, but what I meant was that I guess maybe I was conflating chaos and crisis, but what I meant was that it's not like the human species has lost control of this. The question I'm asking, are we in a kind of chaotic war field where there's bombs exploding everywhere and it's just willy-nilly carnage? Or are we in a controlled torture laboratory where the violence is systematic, controlled, and focused? Of course, for the individual suffering, it manifests as chaos individually, and it is. It's the threat of death. But what I'm saying is that the system I don't see as being really in crisis. I see the system as functioning as it should, and I don't think the system cares about what matters to us. Is all I meant, is that maybe the enemy isn't chaos, but too much order, too much control.
I think you've got a good point, JF, and if I may chime in before, I think we're going to go to Jamie. But this notion that chaos is sort of the opposite of control, and that the more you try to control reality and force it into a kind of framework, the more reality ruptures that framework and creates this kind of chaotic moment where things blow apart. And maybe today, what we're seeing is the results of not thinking in the way that nature thinks, which to us may appear to be chaotic. To us we have this kind of mythological image of the oceanic chaotic sea, the archetypal sea, which is uncontrollable and powerful and wild and just bringing these sort of things. And we have all of these sort of monstrosities from the archetypal, the archetypal sea, the dragons. I wrote an article about this a couple of years ago, kind of framing climate change as a kind of like hyper object dragon, which is asserting itself on us. But perhaps the chaos isn't truly, that nature is putting us through this ringer, but that our systems aren't designed to go through this. Our way of thinking is too small, and it's going to shove chaos in our faces until we kind of switch out of that mode of thinking. Kind of like at the end of Contact. Have anybody seen that movie where the ETs send? It's a sort of like Contact movie where they send this basically blueprint for a spaceship to do galactic travel, and NASA or whatever, the government builds it, but they add a chair. They add like a safety chair and a seat belt and all this stuff, thinking that it's going to help the pilot through because it didn't have that in the original design. It turns out the chair ends up screwing up the thing, and Jodie Foster, the protagonist, is hanging onto the chair for the first few minutes of this crazy galactic ride, and she's getting shook around, and like the metal's falling apart. And it turns out that it was really just the chair the whole time that was getting in the way, because as soon as it broke off and she freed herself, the entire capsule, the interdimensional portal thing, was completely still, and it was an easy ride after that. So in a way, I think maybe there's a point to this idea that we're kind of overlaying reality with a sense of control, which is only going to backfire and give us a lesson about how things are very complex, and how what you're saying, the interrelatedness of things like climate change and what we wake up and do every day, and how we try to make reality a certain follow certain rules, actually works against us in the long run. And unless we start thinking in a kind of interrelated and complex way, complex thinking, we're going to keep facing these unconscious projections of these giants and these chaotic dragons. But
I would just ask there, though, Jeremy, who is the we? Because we have this. I think we might be conflating different, scales from ourselves as individuals to ourselves as a species. But we also have everything in between, and we have different actors, which I think JF may be referring to, who may be using the sense of crisis in a certain way. Right? I mean, there's the political rule of thumb: never let a good crisis go to waste. And if you look at somebody like Trump, you could argue, I think what he's trying to do is instigate crisis, like instigate a sense of crisis, because that's his opening, right? That's his opening to take some form of power. For whatever the psychology behind that is, and I don't want to get into that, but there is, I think, this way in which crisis gets used to frame a certain narrative or to simplify a certain complexity, simplify a certain chaos, and shape, perceptions of what is actually happening, what's real, what's desirable, what we should be doing when we wake up in the morning, who we should be voting for, not voting for, and so forth. And I think that is really where we can look at art. And it's not that art is apolitical. It's not that it doesn't have its own intentionalities and desires and ends. But I think that what it does, one thing it does do, is break those simpler, good art, right? Good art breaks those simpler narratives, and it is a grenade, thrown into the kitchen. And if it has a visionary quality, like John is saying like needs to be there, then what the hope is, my faith is, to the extent that I have a faith, is that kind of explosive visionary quality that breaks simpler narratives and that creates kind of mutant possibilities, whether or not they're going to be manifest, whether or not they're real. Because that's the thing about artists, is like we're not the engineers and the politicians and the ones who actually kind of make the systems. We kind of blow the systems up and we imagine new possible systems, and then it's up to everybody else to go with those or not. But that tension, it's more than a tension, like that crisis between the like how we frame the meaning, like how we make meaning out of what's happening to us, I think is kind of the key question, and that's why I want like creative minds to come together and like sort of figure something out. And I don't mean like solve anything by figure out, but we should be able to like combine our powers or something, like a sort of artistic, Manhattan Project, and like, throw a real, not just like a grenade, but like a nuclear bomb, aim down like missiles of aesthetic vision to, break apart these systems that are inadequate, I think are like, the free creativity that wants to happen, in the world. So anyway, that's, I didn't mean to kind of derail the question. I also want to get to hear Jamie, because we haven't heard from him. But that's sort of thinking is an interesting kind of place to go.
Jamie, are you there? Do you want to try to unmute yourself? We don't see your video, but
yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No. Okay. First, thank you for inviting me. This is my first time at anything like this. I've talked about things like this in private with friends, but I've never been in like a community, I guess, setting, discussing anything like this before. So thank you for, organizing and inviting me to this. I don't really know if anything I'm going to say really is going to be different or change anybody's perspective or anything, but I feel like I want to say something, but so I guess I just will. I think my particular perspective is that of a very, I guess, a melding between the perspective of the energetic and the like unconscious, and trying to intellectualize it and trying to rationally understand what it is that I'm experiencing. And I guess maybe that's really the plight of any artist, right? To bring forth, something from the collective into the conscious realms. The way that I see it, and I'm not asking anybody to necessarily agree with me, but, we've been talking about, like, what does chaos and crisis mean? What is actually going on? And, well, it's one thing to consider is, like, globally, we're more connected than we have been ever as a species with the, internet and everything that's going on. The way that I look at Facebook and, social media is sort of just like, it's much more than meets the eye. It's sort of an unconscious connection, like the collective unconscious, sort of made manifest. And so a lot of people are sort of throwing out fear and, fear-mongering news sources and like, oh my God, look at all of this stuff. Oh my God, it's so horrible. Oh my God, election. Oh my God, Trump. And a lot of people are really afraid. Like a lot of people are fucking scared. And, we've, as a species, and, we've faced crises, we faced crises, and we faced evolution, and we faced, kind of like periods of chaos in the past. But I think in this particular one, it's like there's kind of like a mass hysteria being stoked, and maybe on purpose by a lot of, people that it might benefit them to do so. But I think a lot of people are unconscious of it, like I saw somebody post an article the other day about how much like statistically we as a species are actually improving, like like poverty and disease and hunger and everything is actually going down, and like there's all these great things statistically happening in the world. It's just that we're focusing on very, very everything bad that is happening. And it's sort of like what kind of framework do we have when we look at the news, the media, the saturation of social media into our consciousness and how we process and how we organize our reality? Like, what are we even conscious of what it is doing, and what that deep exposure, is not now. I'm not trying to minimize any of the problems in the world, and I'm not trying to, say that, well, let's just give up and be happy, because that's obviously not the answer. But somebody, spoke earlier about tending your own garden. I think I take that a little bit to a more extreme level. Like, I think we're responsible for the energy that we are putting out into the collective. So if we're just sitting around saying like the world sucks, we're actually like, possibly manifesting more of that negativity in the collective consciousness. That's just something that I've thought about. So I'm like, on one hand, how do we get together and solve some of these issues? How do we create solutions? How do we use art to expand people's consciousness and ideas and, figure out what's going on and how we can make it better? But at the same time, how do we, on an individual level, process our emotional wounds and our emotional trauma? And how do we go forth with, I guess, if you want to say, like, whatever we are contributing to our interactions in our daily lives and, in our art, like, what is our message and how are we resonating with other people? So I don't know, that's a whole bunch of stuff, but.
Thank you, Jamie. That was good. I don't know, what you were talking about kind of reminded me, and it's not exactly related to art, but as a segue, and it's kind of a pseudo segue because we've only got, let's say, about 25 more minutes, and I would really like to kind of just invoke everyone to check out Metapsy and bring in your quotes and something that's relevant to this conversation, or maybe not directly relevant, that's fine too. But I have this statement from a sociologist. It's not on Metapsy, but it's kind of behind my conversation with Connor Habib. It's Zygmunt Bauman, and he's a sociologist. But to me, he had a statement that really encapsulated, I think, what you're saying and what we're saying, not on an artistic level per se, but in a kind of like macro institutional level, which sort of speaks to us locally and globally. But I'm going to quote him, and I invite everybody, Marco, Ali, Carmen, Natalie, to go on to Metapsy and to just bring something into the conversation that you feel, are we doing this? Because, this is our question with Metapsy, like, towards planetary thinking. We don't know what planetary thinking is. Is there a way to do what you're saying, Jamie, to kind of think at this level, to think in this kind of interconnected way? Because to me, anyway, if I were to really kind of reply in a concrete way, the crisis is that inquiry. How do we think differently? How do we relate to the world in a way that answers the crisis by its own being? But towards that, this is a quote where the sociologist Bauman is being interviewed, and he's talking about inequality as a kind of metastasis. And somebody asked him, the interviewer asked him, is democracy under threat? And he goes ahead and he says that we could describe what is going on at the moment as a crisis of democracy, the collapse of trust, the belief that our leaders are not just corrupt or stupid, but inept. Action requires power. To be able to do things, we need politics, which is the ability to decide what needs to be done. But that marriage between power and politics in the hands of the nation state has ended. Power has become globalized, but politics is as local as before. Politics has had its hands cut off. People no longer believe in the democratic system because it doesn't keep its promises. We see this, for example, with the migration crisis. It's a global phenomenon, but we still act parochially. Our democratic institutions were not designed for dealing with situations of interdependence. The current crisis of democracy is a crisis of democratic institutions. And perhaps before we get to politics, we kind of need that visionary state to even imagine something that's beyond what we've been doing and how we've been organizing ourselves. So I I'm going to quit my rambling here and just kind of bring it back to Metasci and bring it back to this inquiry of the visionary state. What can we invoke presently? Is there a piece of art that grabbed us? Is there a quote? Is there a statement? Is there even just a theme from Metasci that we feel is sort of inquiring into this, to really feeling into this? It's really not necessarily answering it, but certainly grabbing onto it and wrestling with it. So what do you guys think?
Can I respond to that, Jeremy?
Sure.
I was just reading.
First, whoever Janice is, can you stop sharing your screen, please?
I'm sorry, what?
Whoever Janice is sharing her screen, and we're all looking at it.
We see a picture of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But thank you, Janice, for that.
I thought it was great.
I'm trying to figure out how to do that. Okay, we're back. Good.
I don't know if this complements what you were saying, Jeremy. I was reading William Irwin Thompson's essay, and I'm a big fan of his, and I've listened to your interview with him, which I really enjoyed. And he mentions that, and I'm just quoting him here briefly, with the new polarization of the United States between the social democracy of Bernie and the white nativism of Trump, the USA is entering a danger zone that can lead to civil war. I just find that very compelling in a way, because a number of years ago, I read a Soviet historian of the United States, and this Soviet historian said that he predicted there would be a civil war. Not a civil war, but a breakdown in the United States. The United States would no longer be the United States, but be something else because of these tensions. And I think William Irwin Thompson is talking about the tensions between the coasts, the West Coast and the East Coast, which are what he talks about, a planetary cultural awareness, and the heartland and the South, which definitely do not have a planetary awareness, but are very a kind of white nativism. It's for white people only. So I think that's a very interesting kind of observation, because I come from the Deep South, and I escaped the Deep South and came to New York when I was in my early 20s. And I've always felt myself to be a refugee, actually, because I was gay and I was raised in an environment where, Ku Klux Klan, I was, my formative years were in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. So it was pretty intense getting out of that world and coming to a place like Manhattan, which has a very rich, I think, cultural identity. If you live here long enough, you sort of absorb the city, and it becomes who you are in a way. So I just want to put that out there, because I think it is connected to the journal. And I like William Irwin Thompson. I enjoyed your interview with Connor. And I enjoyed Marco's article. And I think I haven't read everybody's, but I think there's a real high quality there. And I just want to shout out to everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
All right. So, does anybody else want to chime in with a little, just connecting it back, kind of just bringing it back to the journal, to the topics of the journal, perhaps, perhaps a unrelated note on the same subject?
So it's funny. I was just thinking about the initiative you're all doing itself, the Infinite Conversations and the Metapsychosis, and I was thinking that if we take that response as indicative of or reflective of the meaning of our time, how should I put it? I mean, your initiative is not like an initiative to reduce chaos or to soften crisis, right? So if I just take your artistic response at face value, it's telling me that the way is the way forward is toward crisis and chaos, because you guys aren't doing, you know, a Hillary Clinton, Obama, Theresa May kind of settle down, folks, you know. So your own artistic initiative is telling me something about what meaning our times actually has for you. And I think it's toward the direction of these words that seem to take on, you know, pejorative meaning, but they don't seem to really dance in your zeitgeist that way. So that's my meta reflection. Sorry, can't help myself.
I guess I'm sitting with a tension around the purpose of the magazine, or something like that. Marco, you said that artists are not engineers. They don't build as much as they blow up and point a way forward.
I was exaggerating a little bit. But, yeah.
Okay.
Come on, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so if I make dichotomies, I'll try to hold them loosely, and maybe we can all hold them loosely too. Okay, so there's that. And then I was reflecting on earlier, sort of what I pointed to. I was saying I care about how to make a most effective difference, and I often don't know what that is or what that would even mean. And so then, as someone was talking, I was thinking, well, I guess when you think you know, or when you have a good idea of what to do, you should do it. And if you don't know, you should think about it, or ask others, or try to come up with an idea. And if you don't know how to think, or you don't know what to think about, you should wait and just and be. And so I actually, and then Bonnie's comment about metapsychosis drawing us into the chaos more. And so I guess my question is, I don't think that that's an answer to our problems. I think it is time for builders. So I'm sitting with this tension of, what is the purpose of the magazine? Is it drawing us into chaos more, and is that an appropriate response to our situation, to the problems we're facing, to making a better world?
May I respond to that, Jeremy?
Sure, go ahead.
I think you make a good point. I mean, there's just chaos for its own sake, or just blowing things up for just the fun of it. And I'll admit, just that there is a little boy in me that likes to blow things up. Just cool to do. So you don't want to, but the purpose of the magazine is not just that. I think it's also to find new ways of relating to each other, I think, and to allow people to expose themselves, to be present, to unfold in their full, weird, chaotic, crazy selves. Because I think that under the kind of the orderly surface and the persona that we may present, say on social media, or I mean, that's just an extension of what we would do anyway in our smaller tribal spheres. Our actual being is much crazier than that, and what I feel attracted to is not is going into that, but then creating something out of it. From art does create a kind of order. Like it works with chaos. Chaos is like the raw material, but it does then turn it into a beautiful painting or theater or fiction or music or whatever the form is. And it doesn't just have to be a particular artifact. I mean, it could be performance art. It could be an organizational art, business art. I mean, art is more, I think, a disposition or an orientation than an identity based on the production of certain artifacts. And as far as the journal, it is one piece of a larger project, and the larger project does have more order-oriented dimensions to it. I don't know, this may not be the time to talk about all this, but I mean, just to plant a seed, I mean, part of what we want to do is to organize an actual cooperative organization. So I mean that in a legal sense, like incorporated, operating as a co-op that has a certain constitution, has certain democratic processes, has certain economic features that involve the way that wealth and value is generated and distributed. I think that part of, I was definitely exaggerating, or definitely just speaking one partial part of the story, because part of what I want to do is I want to become sustainable as an artist, and I want to create a system, more than a system, like an ecosystem, like a living thing, where others can also find some sustenance on whatever level that they need. So it is very experimental. I mean, there as far as I know, there are not too many cooperative organizations of artists like connected across the world, like in digital. There are food co-ops, all kinds of co-ops. There's a big cooperative economy, but what would it look like for there to be a creative economy? What would it look like for there to be a creative democracy, where we actually, as artists, allow ourselves to be crazy, allow our full being to come forth in ways that are beautiful, that are not violent and harmful and politically opportunistic or economically opportunistic, but that lay down some different kinds of structures experimentally, because I'm not saying this is not, metapsychosis is not the answer for the world, but I hope that it can be part of an answer for some groups of people, so a network of people who, want to embrace the chaos, want to embrace a full being, be themselves fully, and have that be okay. Have that be okay, because if I'm myself fully, I'm gonna fucking freak people out. And so the people that are in relationship with me need to be okay with being a little freaked out. And they get that way by being okay with themselves. So that's sort of like the shared praxis, is this, like we let ourselves be our full beautiful selves, and let each other be that as well, and then create kind of culture on those terms, but then not try to exploit it from a capitalistic perspective to make a ton of money and build up your little empire, to insulate yourself from the larger chaos.
If I could interject and just bring in a point about art, sort of along the same lines, Marco, you're saying we're creating a living system. I think there's an important point to be said about art, and I got this sort of from John David Ebert's work, and it's this idea that art isn't. It can be deconstructive, yes. It can tear things down. It can create a revolution. It can show you a possible world and become a kind of telos, a kind of attractor towards that world, and so destabilize the world that you're in. But art in itself creates a life world. It creates a space of meaning. It creates a space that you can live in because of the meaningful signifiers, or whatever you want to call it, if you want to go with postmodern philosophy. Art creates a space for you to live in, a domain, a world. So I would simply say that art has a constructive dimension insofar as it's not necessarily the technology. The art isn't sort of the technos. I think the techne comes later, but the poesis is the mana. It's the life force behind. It's the ensoulment of the world you want to live in. And so I think art has a very constructive power in its ability to kind of create a living world for you to step into, and then you start working with it in a constructive way and building new systems and being inspired by this kind of idea of the network or a cooperative. Then you start kind of inhabiting that world and surviving in that world. But I think art can kind of open up a life world to live in. And as opposed to merely being an engineer, I would be cautious about being just an engineer, because without that ensoulment, that's the problem we're having right now, which is how do we bring in the ensoulment and how do we bring in the techne and bring them together? An inhabitable life world, or perhaps many different life worlds in which we can step into out of this kind of dying, decaying, self-deconstructing, post-modernity, end of history kind of scenario, which is horrific in itself. So I would say that art kind of reaches into something that's alive, and that life is where you start. That's just my opinion, of course. But did anybody want to share anything else? Marco was sharing about the co-op and about theory of everybody, and sort of like the sort of the intentionality behind this project. Was there anything that struck you personally about a piece of writing, an idea in our publication?
I see that Jamie had her hand up.
Well, I mean, I was just trying to respond to what Marco was saying, and then Jeremy also, about art as more than just a destructive force. Obviously, it's a regreening. I think, in my opinion, at least, it's sort of a way for the spirit or the soul to move through you and to be manifested into, three-dimensional reality, into shared spaces with other consciousness. So it's more than just shaking it up. It's more than just, the destructive prerequisite to the new order being formed. It can, also be seen as, people who get lost in their ego. What happens when you look at a piece of art? What does it make you feel? What does it stir inside of yourself? Do you feel the urge to create something yourself after looking at a really good piece of art or music or reading something? Like, do you feel that inspiration? And do you see a way to live your life in a better way, or to organize your society, whether it's your local or, we're talking about global politics? I think it's something that has to happen on an individual basis. And I think that dealing with the chaos inside of your mind is just as important as trying to conquer it from a global perspective.
Thank you, Jamie. If I may, if no one else wants to chime in with a quote, I'm just going to quote Connor Habib from our interview, because this is directly about the subject of art. And I asked him, does art or imagination play a role in this new way of thinking? And, oh goodness, just dropped my phone. He says, yes, especially fiction and poetry. Poetry is obvious to me. Poetry is a refusal of the world, particularly the names of the world and everything in it as it is. Poetry demands things be said on new terms, on the terms of the poet first, and then the reader. A poet does not have to accept that a table is a table. They exercise understanding of that object as a relation to their own individuality and write accordingly. Poets have been saying this for a long time, and not enough people have listened. Fiction is important, but I wasn't always so sure why. Once Daniel Pinchbeck asked me what role I thought novels had in the upcoming world, and this was before 2012, of course, because he couldn't see any. He thought, back then at least, that they were a distraction. I love fiction, but it took years and years for the answer to arise. And now I see clearly that it cultivates compassion and vision. When I read, I have to co-create the world using the symbols in front of me, and in fiction, those symbols are of a non-existent world. Co-creating the world with the symbols laid out in front of us. What could be a better description of what is needed right now? We need to see what's before us. And then, we need to see what's before us, learn to read it, internalize it, and then create it by combining it with our individuality. Fiction that pushes on the boundaries of the real is what is most instructive, since what is real and possible is basically owned by people in power. So we need to start our training in the impossible as soon as possible. That was an appropriate way to kind of sum up what we've all been saying here. So does anybody else have anything, right at the 90 minutes, or about 3 minutes away from it. So does anyone else have any kind of closing invocations or closing statements? Or are we all
or even just to
pretty
check
good?
in, just kind of like
Yeah.
presence known if you haven't had anything particular to say, or it's
Hey, Chris,
to speak.
go ahead.
I am wonderfully inspired by all of you who are so much more verbose, and you frame your ideas very well. That's not something I'm good at. But what I am good at is painting with pictures up here. Hence, all the prophets through time have always used metaphor and analogy, because you present a picture and then each person can interpret it on their own level. And everything that's being said here is like a concert. It's like, we are all actors on the stage of life, and all of us here are in the orchestra pit, and we're all playing our instrument. I'm a musician, and I was a professional musician and played rehearsed music. Rehearsed music is the metaphor for our orderly society. And then I ventured off into spontaneous music. And spontaneous music is very challenging in the sense that you have to abandon everything. If it means that you take your profession and you can hold one note in the right place for a very long time, it can make the difference in the overall piece. While you're playing, you can never go back. You can never go back and redo it or revisit it. It's always right here, right now. And while you're playing, you have no idea what it is that it sounds like, which is pretty much what we're doing here. We don't know what we're going to create. We don't know what's going to come of this. We're all just throwing in our notes and our speak and our experiences in the hopes that, something Merkaba-ish will be created. And I am convinced it will. You all have created and started the boulder down the hill. And let me tell you, it's a good thing. Art is the language without words, because it always invokes an emotional response. The saying, it's always in the eye of the beholder, and you either hate it or you love it. That's perfect. That's exactly what's supposed to happen. So when we are confronted with being too self-involved by perfecting our own reality, our reality affects the entirety. It's the 100th monkey in an unseen plane. So when I looked at the Metapsychosis website, I was like, my heart came up. I was like, yeah, this is it. Everybody is rocking on this thing. Language is nothing more than painting sound. It's just a way we've come to throughout the ages. There was a time on the planet, as I understand it, that we all had one language. And now we don't. We all speak a different language, and it's all chaotic. But I tell you, the one thing I did experience in spontaneous music, and even while I was playing it, there were times when I was furious. I'm playing it and I'm thinking to myself, what kind of shit is this? And listening back to it, there were parts of it that were horrendous. And there are parts of it that are glorious. I mean, when you break through the ceiling of the madness and suddenly, without instruction, it all comes together and you just want to hear that forever. Well, that's just the nature of things, and we're in the middle of it. And like Terence McKenna said, we are approaching the greatest novelty in time, if that's a real thing, where all the possibilities that man can conjure will all happen at the same time. Try to imagine that. So I implore you, let's just keep doing this, because this is really good. This is the most excellent of excellent. I see everybody being open and sharing and expressing, and you guys are the bomb, man. And I want to do this again. And I've got nothing but stuff to say, but I'm not going to get started. So, I need a really big canvas once I start to roll. So thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Jim, for inviting me to this, because this is so great. And we're at the right time and the right place, and this is the right note. And everybody, play on, man. Play on. Let's do this again.
Right on, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, any last invocations? Any last?
No.
Okay. Well, sorry?
I said blessings to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We'll see you at the end of next cycle. A couple weeks.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Good night.
Aloha.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.